The joint colony of Veridia Prime hummed with a quiet efficiency, a blend of two distinct philosophies. On one side were the Volarians, beings of pure logic, their forms encased in sleek silver suits that reflected their precise nature. Their society was built on algorithms, on probabilities, on the undeniable truth of numbers. Emotions to them were messy variables, unpredictable and therefore inefficient. Commander Thuron, the lead Volarian on Veridia, embodied this. His voice, when he spoke, was a calm monotone, each word chosen with the precision of a finely tuned instrument. On the other side were the humans. Captain Eva Rostova, the human contingent leader, was Thuron's opposite in many ways. Her movements were energetic, her face expressive. Humans, with their laughter and their arguments, their art and their music, were a constant source of mild bewilderment to the Volarians. The Volarians tolerated human presence because galactic accords mandated cooperation, and humans, for all their perceived flaws, were surprisingly adaptable. But they saw human reliance on what they called hope as a profound weakness, a refusal to accept inevitable outcomes when the data pointed to failure. Veridia Prime was a research outpost, nestled on the edge of the known galaxy, a small green and blue jewel orbiting a stable yellow star. Its purpose was to study unique stellar phenomena, and for 3 standard years, the joint mission had been uneventful, productive even. The Volarians managed the long-range sensor arrays and atmospheric processors with flawless logic. The humans handled planetary exploration, biological studies, and the more unpredictable elements of maintaining a habitat so far from their home worlds. The first sign of trouble came not as a dramatic explosion, but as a series of numbers on a Volarian console. Analyst Kale, a younger Volarian whose silver suit seemed a size too big for his slender frame, tilted his head almost imperceptibly. Commander Thuron. Kale's synthesized voice was a shade less certain than usual. I am detecting anomalous energy readings from the Kepler nebula. Thuron glided to Kale's station, his optical sensors focusing on the rapidly scrolling data. The Kepler nebula was a known, stable formation, a beautiful cloud of interstellar dust and gas. But the readings were undeniable. A cascade of exotic particles, a wave of intense radiation, was blooming from its core, expanding at an alarming rate. For 10 standard hours, the Volarian science team worked, their minds networked, processing quintillions of data points. Captain Rostova and her chief engineer, Ben Carter, stood by, a silent tension in the human section of the central command dome. They understood the gravity of the Volarian calculations. Finally, Thuron turned, his impassive faceplate reflecting the holographic display of the expanding stellar wave. The phenomenon is a previously uncatalogued hyperdimensional energy surge, he stated. Probability of colony survival, 0.00001%. Estimated time to impact, 72 standard hours. All models concur. There is no escape trajectory that will place us outside the blast radius given our current propulsion capabilities. The energy wave will overwhelm our shields and disintegrate all matter on Veridia Prime. A heavy silence filled the dome. The humans looked at each other, faces pale. Ben Carter, a man whose hands were usually stained with grease and whose optimism was infectious, ran a hand through his already messy hair. 0.00001%, he whispered. So, you're saying there's a chance. Thuron's head tilted slightly. The figure is a statistical artifact, Engineer Carter. It represents a theoretical possibility so infinitesimal as to be functionally zero. The logical course of action is to accept the outcome. We will begin shutdown procedures for non-essential systems. All personnel should prepare for cessation. Captain Rostova stepped forward. Commander, with all due respect, humans don't prepare for cessation very well when there's even a sliver of a chance. That tiny number isn't zero. What if we try to boost the shields, or reconfigure the main drive, or something? Thuron regarded her. Captain Rostova, your emotional response is clouding your judgment. Our shields are rated for known threats. This is an unknown, and its energy density far exceeds maximum theoretical shield capacity. Any attempt to boost them would likely result in catastrophic overload before the main wave even arrives. Reconfiguring the main drive would take weeks, not hours. These are facts. Facts can change if you try to change them, Eva insisted, her voice firm despite the tremor she felt inside. We have experimental shield components in storage, the ones your team deemed too unstable. What if we integrate those? Those components operate on unpredictable quantum fluctuations, Kale interjected, his voice still holding that trace of uncertainty. The probability of them stabilizing the shield grid is 0.003%. The probability of them causing an immediate shield collapse is 78%. Then it's a better chance than just sitting here waiting, Eva exclaimed. She turned to her human crew. Who's with me? A murmur of agreement rose from the human contingent. They looked scared, yes, but a stubborn light flickered in their eyes. It was the look of a species that had faced long odds many times before. Thuron's optical sensors narrowed almost imperceptibly. This is illogical. You propose to hasten your own demise based on an emotional response you term hope. It is a denial of reality. Call it what you want, Commander, Eva said, turning back to him. We call it trying. We won't interfere with your shutdown procedures, but we will use our resources, our time, to try and beat those odds. What have we got to lose that we aren't going to lose anyway? Thuron was silent for a moment, processing. Your actions are your own. We will observe. Perhaps your efforts will provide data on human behavior in terminal scenarios. He turned away, signaling the start of the Volerian preparations for the inevitable. They began to move with calm, deliberate motions, archiving data, powering down systems, a quiet acceptance of fate. The humans, in stark contrast, exploded into a flurry of activity. Ben Carter was already at a console, pulling up schematics for the experimental shield emitters. All right, people, he yelled over the sudden bustle. Dr. Eris Thorne's quantum hope generators are up. Let's see if the old dreamer was onto something. The next 60 hours were a blur of frantic effort. The Volerians watched, their impassive faceplates betraying nothing as humans swarmed over the colony's systems. Engineers bypassed safety protocols that the Volerians considered inviolable. Scientists, their faces grim with concentration, worked on equations the Volerians had already dismissed. The experimental shield components, glowing with an unstable light, were hauled from storage and carefully, desperately, integrated into the main shield grid. The air in the human sections crackled with tension, with shouted commands, with the smell of ozone from overloaded circuits, and with something else the Volerians couldn't quite quantify, a fierce, almost joyful defiance. Eva found herself everywhere, coordinating efforts, settling disputes, offering encouragement. She saw a botanist painstakingly trying to shield a small, precious sample of Earth soil, a task utterly pointless in the face of planetary annihilation, yet she did it with intense focus. She saw technicians coaxing power from failing conduits, their knuckles bloody. Ben Carter, covered in grease and sweat, worked miracles with the colony's main engines. The Volerians say we can't change our trajectory enough, he muttered to Eva during a brief pause, gulping down nutrient paste. But what if we don't need to change it much? What if we can just nudge it, create a microwarp field fluctuation, use the planetary defense cannons for pulsed propulsion? It's crazy, I know. Crazy is our specialty right now, Ben, Eva replied, placing a hand on his shoulder. Keep at it. Failures were constant. Systems blew, circuits fried. An entire section of the experimental shield array overloaded, bathing one side of the colony in an eerie, flickering light before collapsing. The Volerians logged each failure meticulously. Probability of human-induced catastrophic failure increasing, Kale noted to Thuron. Thuron simply nodded. Yet, for every failure, the humans found a workaround, a bypass, a completely unorthodox solution. They cannibalized parts from non-essential systems, rerouted power in ways that made Volerian observers twitch, and pushed every piece of technology to, and often beyond, its breaking point. They were not following a logical plan. They were throwing everything they had at the problem, a chaotic storm of ingenuity fueled by a refusal to surrender. With 12 hours left, the stellar wave was a terrifying spectacle on the main view screen, a roiling wall of incandescent energy filling the void. The Volarians had entered their final phase, a meditative state of calm readiness for oblivion. Most humans, however, were still working, their movements now slower, tinged with exhaustion, but no less determined. Ben Carter, his face haggard but his eyes bright, activated his crazy idea. The planetary defense cannons, designed to intercept asteroids, were fired in precisely timed, focused bursts away from the colony. A desperate attempt to impart even the slightest delta V, it was a one-in-a-million shot, that it would do anything meaningful. Simultaneously, the patched-up experimental shield array was brought to full, unstable power. It hummed, it groaned, it spat sparks, but it held, bathing the colony in a wildly fluctuating, rainbow-hued bubble of energy. Eva stood on the command deck, her hands gripping the railing, watching the approaching doom. "That's all we can do," she breathed. "Now we wait." The Volarians, even in their meditative state, continued to monitor. Their instruments registered the erratic shield output, the minute, almost immeasurable thrust from the defense cannons, all within expected parameters of failure. Then something unexpected happened. A small, dense fragment of the stellar wave, an outlier barely visible in the main torrent of energy, hit the most unstable section of the human-modified shield. Instead of collapsing, the experimental emitters, pushed into a quantum state even their creators hadn't fully understood, pulsed. They didn't block the fragment. They resonated with it in a highly unpredictable way, creating a localized distortion, a tiny pocket of warped spacetime that lasted for less than a microsecond. This distortion, infinitesimally small, deflected that one fragment. Alone, this would have meant nothing. But this fragment, now on a slightly altered trajectory, clipped the edge of another, larger fragment within the main wave. The second fragment, nudged by the first, tumbled into a third. It was a domino effect on a cosmic scale, a cascade failure within the structure of the energy wave itself, triggered by one tiny, improbable event. The main front of the stellar wave, the part that would have hit Veridia Prime head-on, began to ripple, to thin in one specific vector, like a tsunami encountering a suddenly formed, unseen reef. On the Volarian command deck, alarms, silent for hours, began to chime. Not alarms of imminent destruction, but alarms of anomalous readings, of data that did not compute. Kale was the first to break his meditative trance, his head snapping up. "Commander, the wave is bifurcating. Energy density directly in our path is decreasing, rapidly." Thuron's optical sensors flared. He ran the numbers again and again. The probability of this specific cascade, this localized weakening of the phenomenon due to such a precise sequence of microevents, was so far beyond improbable it hadn't even registered as a theoretical possibility. It was, by Volarian standards, impossible. Yet it was happening. The main wave hit. The colony shuddered, lights flickered, and the shields, even the conventional parts, screamed under the strain. But the terrifying, overwhelming force they had anticipated was lessened, diverted. A significant portion of the wave, the deadliest core of it, passed them by, deflected by the internal chaos the humans had accidentally triggered. Veridia Prime, battered and bruised, its experimental shields finally giving out in a shower of sparks, survived. The colony was damaged, systems were critical, but life support held. They were alive. In the stunned silence that followed, as the last vestiges of the stellar phenomenon receded into the void, Eva Rostova let out a shaky laugh that turned into a cheer. The human section of the dome erupted in exhausted, jubilant shouts. Commander Thuron slowly rose from his command chair. He walked, not glided, to the transparent partition separating the Volarian and human sections. He looked at Eva, then at the scenes of human celebration, at the debris of their desperate, illogical efforts. His faceplate was, as always, impassive. But Kale, standing beside him, could detect a tremor in his commander's usually rock-steady manipulators. "Captain Rostova," Thuron said, his voice devoid of its usual certainty, containing an inflection Cale had never heard before, something akin to awe. Your actions, the experimental shield, the pulsed propulsion. Our initial assessment was that these would be futile. Eva, leaning heavily on a console, met his gaze. Yeah, well, hope for the best, plan for the worst, and kick the improbable in the teeth, Commander. That's kind of how we roll. Hope, Thuron repeated the word, as if tasting it for the first time. We calculated the probability of your individual actions succeeding as near zero. We did not calculate the probability of multiple, disparate, low-probability actions, creating a synergistic cascade effect that would alter the macro event itself. He paused. It seems our models were incomplete. This hope you speak of, it is not mere emotional denial. It appears to be a variable, an unpredictable, yet powerful driving force for generating improbable outcomes. Ben Carter, grinning tiredly, chimed in, "You could call it the hope algorithm, Commander. It doesn't always work, but when it does, the universe takes notice." The Volarians did not celebrate, but as the immediate crisis passed and the long process of repair began, a profound change occurred within them. They began to study the logs of the human efforts, not as a record of primitive desperation, but as data on a new, terrifyingly potent phenomenon. They reran simulations, trying to factor in this hope variable, this human tendency to try everything, to believe in the infinitesimal, to defy the inevitable through sheer, stubborn, illogical effort. Their probability models, once the bedrock of their civilization, seemed fragile, incomplete when faced with this intangible human trait. Cale approached Thuron days later as the first supply ships from the core worlds, alerted by Veridia's survival, began to arrive. "Commander," he said, "I have been analyzing the data from the event. If the humans had followed our logical protocols, we would all be particulate matter." Thuron stared out at the stars, at the now peaceful Kepler nebula. "Indeed, Analyst Cale, we have encountered a force that transcends our current understanding of the universe. A force that can, it seems, reshape reality itself, not through superior logic, but through a profound irrationality." News of Veridia Prime's survival, and the reason for it, spread through the galactic concord. At first, with disbelief, then with a dawning sense of unease and respect among other logical, probability-driven species. Humanity, long considered erratic, emotional, and inefficient, was suddenly viewed in a new light. Their unpredictability, their emotional extremes, their baffling insistence on hope against overwhelming odds were no longer seen merely as flaws. They were seen as a potential strength, a wild card in the deck of cosmic probabilities, a force that could achieve the impossible. A new legend began to circulate among the stars, a cautionary tale whispered in the sterile data streams of logical races and the bustling forums of more chaotic civilizations alike. Do not dismiss human hope. Do not rely on your probabilities when humans are involved, for they carry within them an algorithm more powerful than any logic, an algorithm that can and will defy the odds. The Volarian technocracy officially added a new research directive: the study of human metaphysical variables, initial focus, hope. Their equations would never be the same. And the galaxy, looking at the small, messy, emotional species from a planet called Earth, began to wonder what other impossible things they might achieve, armed with nothing more than that baffling, powerful thing called hope.